Genshin has a lot of villains. While they're scared of making pure evil playable characters, they have plenty of characters who are evil but not playable. An example at the time of writing this video is Dottore, who as of 5.2 is indisputably evil and irredeemable, but not playable. And to be clear, I'm a fan of irredeemably evil characters, provided the story handles them well. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about a character who is clearly a villain, but is still sympathetic. Childe. Childe, I feel like is something to be reminded, is not a good person. He almost nuked Liuba off the map and works for one of the worst regarded organizations in Tavad. He lies to his little brother constantly, even though it's for good reason, and he literally talks about wanting to conquer the world. But despite these bad things he does, so many people like or even relate to him. So why? How can such an evil character feel so human? And more importantly, how can we make our own evil characters this well balanced? Let's get into it. Before we into it, your quick reminder to like and sub. I make a ton of videos just like this one every week examining Genshin's writing. If you want to stay up to date with when I post, turn on your notifications or join my Discord. We have an amazing community there dedicated to creativity and Genshin. Oh, also, we have a writing art contest going on in the Discord until December 21st. Winners will receive a welcome. Plus, we have a general giveaway that you can enter just by joining the server. I've also started a second channel called X as Edis where I'll post occasional analysis of games and stories that aren't Genshin, as well as any other things I want to do that aren't my normal content. Go sub there, link in the description. Anyway, with that, let's get into the video. Before we look at Childe specifically, we need to ask if we should humanize villains at all. In recent years, mainstream media has been leaning toward the redemption arc, thanks Zuko. 90% of modern villains actually have some trait that makes them actually not all that bad. And my god, is this getting annoying. Well, it can make for complex villains. A lot of stories nowadays fumble it into just excusing bad acts. Like, oh, he's not that bad. I know he murdered countless innocent kittens and babies, but he had a bad childhood, sob, sob. Like, I'm sorry, what? While said villain deserves sympathy, that should be directed toward his childhood, not his actions. Especially not in this case, when his actions suck. But while there's obviously a ways redemption can be done well, that's not the point here. We're asking if we can humanize and not come across as insensitive, and absolutely yes. Let's go back to the hypothetical villain I mentioned. If the story framed his bad childhood as an excuse, that's a problem. It's like I said, excuses killing babies and kittens because he had a bad childhood. It teaches readers inadvertently that if they had a bad day, go ahead and murder innocents, when no. In order to transfer this to good writing, you have to recontextualize it. Instead of excusing, simply have it explain. Then the audience will understand the villain, which will naturally add some depth. It allows room for empathy, but at the same time, it doesn't condone killing babies and kittens. This is the key, and in 90% of redemption arcs, it's the key for realism. So yes, humanize villains. Adding a human aspect to your villain is a good thing in most cases. Like I said, it's an easy but effective way to add some depth and nuance to your villain. You can make their motive similar to your protagonist to get some nice foil action in there. But draw the line at that, an explanation. Further just comes across as condoning their actions, which is usually not what the author intends. Okay, enough about general villains, let's talk about Childe. I'm not a Childe fan for my own unrelated reasons, but he's honestly really well written, especially for his era of Genshin. Childe is a villain, a limb of the Harbingers. And before this gets disputed, yes, he's a villain. But that seems like a simplified definition of who he is. A lot of people out there call Childe a morally ambiguous character, and a lot of the arguments I've seen for that are glossing over the detail that, at the end of the day, he still did those bad things. Now, before I get angry comments, let me explain. Many of Childe's actions, especially Liuba, are not morally ambiguous. He summoned Osile, something that he full well knew would lead to the death of many. He lied to his little brother. He's bloodthirsty and craves battle. That's not gray, that's evil. And here's the thing, his reasons aren't morally ambiguous either. Childe did this because he's a blind loyalist and didn't want his family hurt. That's the only reason he summoned Osile. He lied to his brother for a similar reason, to keep him from being hurt. These are obviously good reasons. So no, he's not morally ambiguous. Him being morally ambiguous would imply that both good and bad were gray, when that's not true. I like to point to another option, that being morally complex. He's done good, he's done bad. He's complex, but not gray. Explaining why this is relevant got deleted, so I'll just really quickly explain. The reason why the distinction between morally ambiguous and complex is so important is that it defines Childe as still a villain. An ambiguous character can better be an antagonist, not a villain. Whereas a morally complex character can have clearly done bad things and be a villain, yet have sympathetic aspects to them. I'm just going to quickly quote an article I read on this that said it way better than I could. Moral ambiguity became conflated with moral complexity. As if a character's feeling of ambiguity in some situations, being uncertain whether what was the right choice, or feeling tempted to a wrong one, made that character morally ambiguous. From there, morally ambiguous expanded to mean that readers cannot discern whether the character was good or bad, or whether the character had a conception of right or wrong. And from there, predictably, the moral ambiguous character became the one who ignored any such considerations and simply acted on personal preference. The link to this article is in the description if anyone is interested in reading more, but back to the video. To help clarify this further, let's look at a specific example with him. I kinda mentioned this earlier, but it just works so well that I'm low-key obligated to look at it. In Childe's story quest, we meet a little boy named Tusser. Upon progressing the quest, we learn this little boy is Childe's younger brother. This quest is genuinely so good for Childe as a character. Up until this point, he's mostly a one-dimensional bad boy who likes fighting and isn't old enough to avoid the tricks of his coworkers. But when we're introduced to Tusser, this changes. Suddenly, there's a whole new layer added to Childe. The Victory is an organization to be feared, but never once do we consider it should be feared by its own harbingers. Childe does not want Tusser involved in his work for obvious, valid reasons. It's dark work, and Childe has to do things we learn he doesn't always want to do. But more important than that, we learn if his family is too far involved, they pay for his slip-ups. Of course, he wants to protect his youngest brother from fearing their wrath. He's no longer just a cartoon villain who wants to destroy Liyue and fight people. He just wants to keep his family safe. What makes this even better is how it connects to the Traveler as a protagonist. We're also looking for our sibling. So as the Traveler, we can understand how much family means to Childe. And we're obviously a person with humanity, so when we're comparing our child to ourselves in a light of, oh, look how similar he is, it automatically makes him human too. Another thing Childe does well is show us his perspective. Now, he's no main character, but he's obviously playable. Which means, if you want to get to know him in a sense, simply read his character stories. In them, he has letters to his family. We learn some little things about him. He likes to meditate while ice fishing. His father gets a lot of migraines. He has much admiration for the Shritza. These details ultimately don't matter in the world of Genshin's story, but they help add depth to him, as a person, as a human. But most importantly, we learn about his past. Childe used to be a shy, quiet boy, but when he was 14, he fled the monotony of his home. By the way, a common misconception I saw and personally believed was that he fled because he's enlisted, and that's not the case. But since he fell into the abyss by accident and met Skirk, who trained him. When he emerged, he was much stronger and more confident than ever. But his father didn't like this change, sending him to the military to toughen him up. Now, I'm going to put a bit of a crack theory here, but hear me out. What's significant about the age 14? Two big things. 1. High school, which is basically the abyss itself. In high school, you meet a lot of new people and make a lot of connections that shape you as a person. People have called high school a dress rehearsal for life, and that's pretty accurate. But the other thing here is that for boys, 14 is when puberty tends to hit its peak. This may be me looking way into things, but between the whole high school thing and Child's biggest change coming when real human puberty starts, there's likely symbolism to some extent. I do think I may be picking up on something subtle, or maybe just making it out of nothing, so let me know what you think in the sense it's a bit more of a crack theory, but back to the main topic. If we go with the assumption that my theory is true, this just adds to his humanization. His story parallels many stories of parents not liking how their children change as they age. While Child's father liked how tough he became, he hated the new wildness to his son, therefore trying to quell it via the military. This connected with someone. The parent who doesn't accept you as you grow up is a common reality for millions of people, and puberty is a literal universal experience. As I mentioned with the Traveler, if you're able to make someone relate to that character, or even some aspects of a villain, that instantly humanizes them to the reader, because we can't relate to things that aren't at least the same on a fundamental level. This next little bit isn't about how Childe will humanize villain himself, but how he helps humanize little groups, so just humor me for a second. Up until we meet Childe, the Fatui is a faceless organization. Like, sure, there's Signora, but she's just kinda evil, and up until now, pretty one-note, just bad. This gives the Fatui a bad look by kinda just simplifying them to the bad guys. But when we meet Childe, he saves us, and we're inclined to like him. Then it turns out he's from the Fatui. Suddenly, Signora's one-note evilness is contrasted by him. He appears when we meet to be a nice, human guy, and this confuses us, and we're made to think on it. That has depth of the Fatui and a human face to them that we can actually appreciate as a person. Okay, one last thing. So at the beginning of the video, I mentioned how it's important to explain but not excuse. One of the biggest complaints I've seen with Childe is just how the Travelers chill with him after he almost nuked Liyue. And yeah, it makes sense as a critique, but at the same time, we establish a connection with Childe through his brother. We understand him because we, as a Traveler, love our missing sibling. And it's worth acknowledging that we never forgive Childe. We never go, oh, that's all chill, go blow up a city. And in recent acts, Childe even redeemed himself in my eyes by doing the reverse. In Liyue, he tried to drown the city. In Fontaine, he tried to save people from drowning. The parallels are there, and they really work. And knowing Hoyo, they aren't unintentional with their details. But in the end, that still doesn't excuse his actions, and we have yet to see him own up to it. I have a feeling that he'll come full circle and says Naya instead of the, 270 he did just now. and at least he'll play a much bigger role, and I'm excited to see what role he does play. So, what can we take from Childe and apply to our own villains to make them feel as humanized as him? 1. Explain, don't excuse. Provide context for the villain's actions to help the audience understand them without justifying their wrongdoings. This allows for depth without condoning evil acts. Childe did bad things, I don't think anyone's denying that. But we can understand why he did them, adding an aspect of humanity. 2. Adding on that, balance good and evil traits. Show that the villain has valid moments and redeeming qualities. For example, loyalty to family, while ensuring their harmful actions remain central and unambiguous. Again, as what I said above, just make sure to explain these traits. Why do they exist? 3. Focus on moral complexity, not ambiguity. Avoid presenting the villain's actions as morally gray if they clearly aren't. This can dilute their evil as a villain. Instead, highlight the contrast between their good motives and evil deeds to create a morally complex character. 4. Make them relatable. Introduce universal or familiar experiences the audience can connect to, such as familial love, sibling bonds, or struggles with change and acceptance. 5. Add personal depth through small details. Include personal habits, relationships, or preferences that make the villain feel like a real person, like Childe letters to his family or his ice fishing hobby. 6. Use backstory to enhance the humanity. Develop a backstory that explains how the villain became who they are, focusing particularly on pivotal life events that shape their worldview or personality. 7. Highlight contradictions. Show the tension between the villain's personal values and their actions. For example, they might value family but create harm against others to protect them. 8. Create connections to the protagonist. Draw parallels between the villain and the protagonist to emphasize their shared humanity. Since you already humanize your main character, you might as well make it easier for yourself to humanize that villain by just drawing that parallel. 9. Allow for vulnerabilities. Give the villain moments where their weaknesses or fears are evident. This could include concerns for loved ones or struggles with the consequences of their actions. 10. Challenge preconceived notions. Introduce the villain in a way that contradicts the audience expectations. For example, Childe initially saved the traveler, making his later betrayal more impactful. It also adds some humanity to him by, again, showing he's complex. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. If you made it here, definitely like and sub. If you wanted the chance to win Unwelcomed, just click the link to join my Discord in the description. I'm also trying to brainstorm new ideas for videos, so if there's any topics you'd want to see me cover, comment those and like any comments with ideas you also like. Alright, have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night wherever you are, and hope to see you in the next one.